Salud, amigos.
Greetings, friends, crew member of our beloved, polluted, and unique spacecraft. It has taken 2 turns about temporary access since we last saw each other, and we have a program about our current history. And for this, I would like to introduce our guest. If I'm not standing up, it's because we have a guest, and today's guest is extremely important. José Luis Alcala Ojeda, grandson of Fabricio Ojeda, anthropologist from the Central University of Venezuela, with courses of sociology in the same university, research in National Center of Historical Studies, writer about this matter, speaker, president of the Fabricio Ojeda class in the School of the National Armed Forces, UNEFAM. We're colleagues there, both professors, with award certificates from different places. He has worked in the book about Fabricio Ojeda. He is a direct descendant from José Gabriel de Alcalá, historical person who signed the Act of Independence of Venezuela on the Cumaná province on June 5th, 1911, the first constitution of Venezuela, and the Cúcuta Congress. And Fabricio Ojeda, on the maternal side, a historical character who was a journalist, a president of the Patriotic Board, and he was a member of the Congress, and he became part of the armed fight as a member of the guerrilla, and this is the topic of today, with researcher José Luis Alcalá. Welcome. Thank you, Walter. Today's topic is extremely important, and it's great to have you here so we can understand this. So tell us about your maternal grandfather, Fabricio Ojeda, and we'll show some pictures of him as well as some videos.
Sí, bueno, Walter, de verdad que es un honor para mí estar en este programa.
It's an honor for me being in this show. Fabricio Ojeda was a historical character, a very important one in the history of Venezuela, but also in the history of Latin America and the world. And it's one of the things that we would like to highlight today, because of course, as you know, this show is a program related to international topics and watch all around the world, not only in Venezuela. And we'd like to highlight not only the qualities of Fabricio Ojeda. We often know his national aspects about him being a journalist, a politician, a member of the Patriotic Board, a congressman, a member of the guerrilla, and then he was brutally killed. But we want to highlight his international aspect, his friendship with Che Guevara, with Fidel Castro, and his relationship with the Cuban Revolution. Here we also have some presentations. I brought the file of Fabricio Ojeda and some historical documents of Fabricio Ojeda, some videos that we're going to take a look at. And Walter, could you please have the honor of reading the summary of activities of the file of Fabricio Ojeda that you have with you? And we will know the background of Fabricio. Here you have the copy of a historical document. So it's a quick sample that I'm going to read. Summary of activities. September 19, 1954, a charter where he denounces the complot to kill Pérez Jiménez. Then, report related to the arrival of a lot of weapons of different kinds, where it's mentioned, March 14, 1957, a report about subversive movements against Pérez Jiménez and everything related to him in the research of Security Service. Then, January 10, 1958, political statement on the Junta Patriótica, the Patriotic Board. He travels to Havana through Kingston, and in this opportunity was interviewed with Fidel Castro, and he appoints him lieutenant of the Revolutionary Cuban Army. This is not very well known. June 1962 sends a letter to the Congress exposing the reasons due to which he's going to the mountains. He had a very important place there, and he decided to give up everything and go to the mountains. March 16, 1962, detained with Roberto Pérez in the Portuguese state. March 17, 1963, he escapes together with 9 people of the National Jail of Trujillo. February 16, 1962, a statement of Carlos Negrete as Commander Roberto, manager of the precinct Iván Barrete, of José Antonio Páez. Part of press information is that he's sick in the mountain and has negotiated his rendition with the army. June 16, signing a declaration of the youth of MIR and the youth of the communists about the elections of the guerrilla commander, signing letters to Fidel Castro as president of FLN, together with American Martin and Douglas Bravo. Tough times back then. And with all this, here I have some information of a telegram sent to the Pentagon due to the death of Commander Ernesto Che Guevara in Casa de las Américas magazine edition number 1. President Leone suggested the Bolivian government to widespread the news that Che Guevara had killed himself. He was captured alive. The Venezuelan government was willing to send this. This is a telegraph, so it's difficult to read. Captured alive, stop. Venezuelan government willing to show peace. Digipol expert, suicide. Guerrillas stop, experts in manufacturing the suicides of guerrilla. And the same expert, Fabricio Ojeda, of this case, stop. That's how the old telegrams were shown. The stops are pauses dividing clauses. This shows, of course, is witness of a time. So you have the genes of him. Tell us about this. I would like to highlight, we would like to show the friendship of Fabricio Ojeda with the Cuban Revolution, because we just commemorated 2 years of the death of Fidel Castro, and this is an homage not only to Ojeda but also to Fidel Castro, because they had a very deep friendship. They were political brothers. It was beyond camaraderie. They were more than brother in arms. They were real brothers. And Fabricio, after 1958, when he became famous for being the president of the Junta Patriótica in the Marcos Pérez Jiménez dictatorship, 1 year after, Commander Fidel Castro Ruz visited Venezuela. Only 23 days had taken place after the take of the Cuban Revolution in Havana, and the first country visited by the revolution of Fidel Castro with Barbudo was Venezuela. And this was due to different reasons. First, thanking all the favors of Venezuela, about the support of Venezuela for the Cuban Revolution. First, they had gathered 1 bolívar for the Sierra. This was a day of collecting money, where they gave 1 bolívar to help the ones in Sierra Maestra, and the Wolf and Rosabal had taken power. In 1958, with the help of Fabricio, they sent some weapons to Havana. He was Admiral Wolfgang, yes, Admiral Wolfgang Larrazabal, who was the president of the government board at this point. So they sent this group of weapons to Sierra Maestra, and this group of weapons were extremely important for the victory of the revolution. Then Fidel went to Havana on February 1st, 1959, and 23 days later, in order to commemorate the first anniversary of January 23, 1958, the overthrow of Marcos Pérez Jiménez. Fidel came here to Venezuela as an act of gratefulness for all the favors of Venezuela, but also because we need to remember that there was a revolution of Cuba
como su opónimo a José Martí.
have José Martí as a very important name, a great leader of the revolution. José Martí was a Bolivarian. And of course, Cuban revolutionaries follow Martí and are Bolivarian. And it was very important for them to get here to acknowledge the land of Simón Bolívar, and that's why Fidel decided to come here as his first visit. And they met Fabricio Ojeda and other important leaders back then. Fidel visited different places. The main room of the Central University of Venezuela. He gave a speech in Plaza del Silencio. And Fabricio presented Fidel Castro. And they created a great friendship. Fabricio started traveling constantly as a congressman. He was chosen on December 7, 1958 as a congressman in the elections won by Rómulo Betancourt. And Fabricio started creating a very important friendship with the Cuban Revolution, especially with Fidel Castro. There, Fabricio started becoming not only a great fighter, but also a great intellectual, because Fabricio wrote a lot of things. He was a journalist, he wrote press articles, but also essays, books, papers, and letters. So Fabricio wrote a book called Cuba, Esperanza de América Latina, Cuba, the Hope Letter for 1959. And he started being related to this effervescence of the Cuban Revolution. He met Ernest Hemingway, he met Massetti, Jorge Ricardo Massetti, founder of Prensa Latina, Rodolfo Wolf, because Fabricio was also a collaborator of the foundation of Prensa Latina in 1959. And it started from this point, together with Fidel Castro. He continued living with what was known as the Cuban Revolution. And they grew links between the Cuban Revolution and the Venezuelan Revolution. For this moment, the movements of resistance were starting that eventually led to the armed fight in Venezuela, the guerrilla members, the guerrilla movements resisting the brutal repression of Rómulo Betancourt towards the march of the unemployed, the workers, the farmers. Remember that first shoot and no later, and fortunately famous, infamous award of Rómulo Betancourt, where repression was terrible in our country in Venezuela. And from this point on, the members of the revolution did not have any other choice but to create the resistance in an armed fight. And of course, Fabricio, in contact with the Cuban Revolution, was invited. Imagine this. He was the honored guest for the first anniversary of taking over power in Havana. On January 1st, 1960, Fabricio was the guest of honor of Fidel Castro to visit Sierra Maestra, because Fidel visited Sierra Maestra to see how it was just 1 year after taking over power of Cuban Revolution power. And Fabricio was the guest of honor. He was there with Fidel, with Celia Sanchez, and with other important colleagues. Celia Sanchez was the secretary, the right hand of Fidel Castro, of course, and with other members of the revolution. And they took pictures in Pico Turquino, a very famous place that has a bust of José Martí. And there, Fabricio deserved a military rank that for that moment there were only two people internationally who had a military rank in Cuba, Ernesto Che Guevara and Fabricio Ojeda. Commander Fidel Castro gave him the rank of lieutenant of the Cuban army to Fabricio Ojeda, my grandfather, and Fabricio, of course, for this moment, was visiting Venezuela very often. He was also visiting, traveling to other countries in Latin America. He was in Brazil, he was in Chile, in Argentina, in Uruguay, in Paraguay. He was in many, many countries, but he also visited countries of the Soviet Union, of the former USSR. He was also in China, Walter. So it was very important because Fabricio became an international leader. He was welcomed by important characters in all these countries. And of course, just like in Venezuela, he was acknowledged worldwide with revolutionary projects of the left wing, where the national liberation was already being created. And Fabricio was given this rank of lieutenant of the Cuban army. And when he was coming here, the right wing, as always, with all of these evil campaigns, as the ones against Simón Bolívar and Commander Hugo Chávez, they unleashed a brutal fight against Fabricio. And they called him Teniente Hilton because he was staying at the Hilton Hotel. Then it was nationalized as a hotel. But it was the campaign. But this happened in Venezuela because the right wing did not like the relation between Fabricio and Fidel Castro. Imagine, Walter, the magazine, Life magazine, a very important magazine, Life magazine, which was really influential in that time, of course. A whole edition was about Fidel Castro, and one of the articles was about Fabricio Ojeda. And as part of this article, they mentioned that Fabricio was one of the most dangerous people in Latin America after Fidel Castro. So Fabricio had not yet resigned from the Congress. He was not yet a member of the armed fight, but he was yet a relevant member of the left wing of the revolution, and further as part of the liberation fights for national liberation. So Fabricio, of course, participated in a very important act, which was closing down the Congress, the Latin American Congress of the Youth. There, Fidel Castro nationalized, and it was the beginning of the so-called second independence. Fabricio included the name of all the youth in America. He was the person. Only two people were allowed to speak, Fabricio Ojeda and Fidel Castro. And Fabricio spoke for all the youth in Latin America. And then Fidel Castro started the so-called beginning of the second independence, which was already mentioned by José Martí, because Cuba was first independent from Spain, and then there was a protectorate of the United States trying to supposedly helping them against the supremacy of Spain, but it was a trap to take over Cuba. And this led to a process of the so-called second independence that only took place when the Cuban Revolution was able to take over power, and when, as part of this closing event, the Latin American Congress of Youth, with Fidel Castro, who signed the nationalization of all transnational companies existing in Cuba. This was an incredible act, an overwhelming act, extremely emotional, so much that Fidel Castro could not continue speaking. He had to let Raúl speak because he was so emotional, because socialism was happening. They were signing the nationalization, giving all the sugar centrals with the name of un país latinoamericano, one Latin American country. And of course, Fidel Castro was so excited, so emotional about this, because what José Martí said was becoming accomplished, the beginning of the second independence. So he was a fun, he had to drink some water to rest for a second. Raúl Castro had to speak on behalf of him. And then Fidel Castro spoke again, and it was a lot of emotion, because it was the announcement to all his people that all the transnational companies were leaving the country, that these corporations were no longer going to be in Cuba, and the process of socialism was going to start within the Cuban Revolution. Additionally, Fabricio there were a lot of lies about him. As part of the brutal campaign of the right wing against Fabricio, Octavio Lepage, an infamous person who gave the news about the natural caused allegedly death of Rodriguez.
era diputado también
and
junto
he
con
was a
Fabricio.
congressman together with Fabricio.
Octavio Lepage
And Octavio Lepage
llama a Fabricio
called
perturbado
Fabricio
mental
mentally disturbed due to his constant travels to Cuba, and Fabricio answered,
Se refirió el doctor Lepage a mis viajes a
Dr.
Cuba,
Lepage
a
spoke
ese
about
país
my
que hoy
trips
es
to
ejemplo
Cuba,
de
to the country
transformación,
that's
de
now an
dignidad
example of
y de
transformation,
coraje, a
dignity,
ese
and
país
courage.
donde un
The
puñado de
country
valientes
where a
tienen
group of brave people
andando de cabeza a la
have
más
turned
grande
away
potencia del
the
llamado
greatest
mundo
power of the
occidental.
so-called third
Y voy a
world.
Cuba e iré
And
a
I
Cuba
will
como
go
he ido a
to
otros
Cuba and will
países porque
continue
mis
visiting Cuba as I have visited other countries,
políticas
because my
solo pueden
political concerns
satisfacerse
can
a
only be
través del
satisfied
estudio y
with
la
the study
investigación
and
de
the
las realidades.
investigation of
Un
realities.
político que no viaje, un
A
político que no
politician who
estudie
doesn't
y que
travel,
no
who doesn't
investigue las
study,
realidades
and who doesn't
universales
investigate
es
universal
un político
realities
fracasado.
is a failed politician.
Entonces Fabricio le estaba
So
dando
Fabricio
una lección a Octavio Lepage,
was teaching
diciéndole,
Octavio
todo
Lepage a
político debe
lesson,
formarse,
telling him that
estudiar,
every
investigar y
politician
viajar
needs to be
alrededor del mundo para poder
trained,
ver
needs to
todas
study,
las
and needs to
realidades
travel
que
around the
se-
world
que
to
se
see the
suceden.
realities that take place
Y
in
bueno, la
other
relación de
places.
Fidel
And the
y
relationship
Fabricio cada
of
vez se volvió
Fidel
mucho más
and
estrecha.
Fabricio became closer with the
Justamente
years.
Fabricio
And Fabricio
tuvo la necesidad por una causa,
had the need,
por causas mayores, justamente su esposa
due to
Dalia Díaz,
causes.
enferma
His
de
wife, Dalia
cáncer, mi
Diaz, was
abuela.
sick with
Nosotros
cancer.
decimos que,
My grandma,
lamentablemente, los familiares de Fabricio Ojeda,
unfortunately, the family members of
vivimos
Fabricio
justamente lo que
Ojeda,
padeció el pueblo venezolano con el comandante Hugo Chávez,
we
¿no?
felt what happened in Venezuela
Bueno,
with
sufrió
Commander
esta
Chavez,
enfermedad terrible que es el
suffering
cáncer,
this terrible
y
disease,
que fue
cancer.
tratado justamente allá
And
en
he was
Cuba, ¿no?
treated in
Igualmente fue
Cuba.
con mi abuela. A mi
He
abuela
was
le detectaron
there
cáncer
with
en un
my
viaje
grandma. My
de estos viajes que
grandma
hizo mi
was detected
abuelo
with cancer in
hacia
one
la
of the
Unión
trips
Soviética,
when she traveled to the Soviet
pero
Union with
mi
my grandpa.
abuela
However, my
para ese
grandma,
momento no
at this
decidió
moment,
operarse
didn't
allá
decide
en
to
la
get
Unión
surgery in
Soviética.
the Soviet Union.
Y luego cuando ya empezó a
And then when
sentirse
she
quebrantada de
started
salud, mi abuelo
feeling
decidió
problems with
llevársela
her
a
health, my
Cuba,
grandpa
donde
decided
ya
to take her
pocos
to
años,
Cuba.
estamos hablando de los años 60, el año 1960,
This is the
1961, ya
1960s,
empezaban a haber avances
1961.
dentro de la
There were
medicina, la
already
ciencia, la
progress
tecnología en
in
Cuba.
medicine, science,
Y mi abuelo
technology in
decide
Cuba.
llevársela para allá
So
para
my
que le
grandpa
traten el
decided
cáncer.
to take her to Cuba so
Pero
that
además,
she
como
could
fue
get
un
her
periodo
cancer
prolongado,
treated. But
casi
it was
un
a
año,
prolonged time, almost a year.
mi abuelo también se
So
llevó a
my
sus
grandpa
hijos
also
y se
brought his
llevó
children
a su suegra, ¿no? A la
and
mamá de mi
his
abuelo.
grandmother, my grandmother's
Y
mother.
para que tú veas la amistad
And just so
tan
you can
profunda que
see the
había
deep
entre
friendship
Fidel Castro
between
y
Fidel
Fabricio Ojeda,
and Fabricio Ojeda,
Fidel Castro hacía
Fidel
exactamente
Castro
lo mismo que hacía
did the
con el
exact
comandante
same
Hugo
thing
Chávez.
that he did
Era
with
visitar
Hugo Chavez,
prácticamente todos
visiting
los días
almost
a mi
every
abuela
day
Dalia Díaz
my grandmother
para ver y
Dalia Diaz
constatar cuál era su estado
to
de
see
salud.
how she was doing
Así era de
health-wise.
hermandad, de
That
confraternidad,
was the
lo que era la
friendship,
relación
the fraternity
de
of the
Fabricio
relationship
Ojeda
between Fabricio
con
Ojeda
Dalia Díaz.
and Dalia
Y tenemos
Diaz.
justamente un telegrama
And there's
oficial
an official
donde,
telegram
Fabricio, el
where
comandante Fidel Castro
Commander Fidel Castro
le manda justamente un
sends a
telegrama
telegram
a mi abuelo
to
cuando su
my
esposa
grandfather
Dalia Díaz
when Dalia
fallece.
Diaz unfortunately
Así que
passed.
Yo
esto
tengo
muestra
aquí un fragmento de cable que me imagino
I have
que
here
es el que
a
estamos
fragment of the
viendo, ¿eh?
telegram. Is this
No,
the one
ese
we're
es
talking
el
about?
posterior.
No,
Ese es
no, it's not the
posterior,
one.
sí.
This one came
No quiero
after.
entrar en el anacronismo. Dale que
I don't want
Sí.
to be anachronic, so
Y
please go ahead. And of
justamente,
course,
3 días después, 2
3
días después
days,
que muere
2 days
Dalia
after
Díaz,
the
le llega
death
ese
of Dalia
telegrama
Diaz, he received
oficial
this official
de Fidel
telegram
Castro
from Fidel
a-
Castro,
al Congreso,
and it was
a
submitted
Fabricio
to
Ojeda en
the
el Congreso,
Congress to
expresándole
Fabricio
su sentido
Ojeda,
pésame
showing
por la
his
muerte de Dalia Díaz. Así que
respects
esto
due to
muestra
the
que
death of
Fidel
Dalia
Castro
Diaz.
y
So this
Fabricio
shows
Ojeda no
that Fidel
solamente
Castro and
eran
Fabricio Ojeda
compañeros de lucha,
were
eran
more than
camaradas,
brothers in
sino
arms, they
que
were
ya
comrades,
existió una
but they
una
also
relación no solamente de
had a
amistad,
deeper
sino de
relationship. It
hermandad
was not only
suprema
friendship but
entre
fraternity,
estos dos
brotherhood
compañeros.
between these
Y
two.
bueno, para ese momento
And
también
for
se
this
está
moment,
empezando a gestar lo que fue la invasión de Playa
the
Girón,
invasion of
Guante.
Playa Girón was
La
starting
invasión
to
de
take
Bahía de
place,
Cochino y
of
el-
Bahía de
por supuesto, la
Cochinos, and
resistencia
of course the
Playa
resistance
Girón,
in
¿no?
Playa Girón.
Y no tenemos la certeza,
And we're not
pero
certain,
Fabricio, que escribió
but
tantas
Fabricio,
cosas
he wrote so
sobre
many
Cuba,
things about Cuba.
Hay una posibilidad de que incluso
There's
Fabricio, con un
a
rango
possibility that
del ejército
Fabricio,
cubano,
with
haya
the rank in the
incluso
Cuban
podido
army,
combatir,
could have even fought.
en Playa Girón.
in Playa
Eso lo estamos
Girón.
investigando,
We are
tenemos
investigating
la
this
intención
right
de
now.
viajar
We
a la isla de Cuba
want to
para
travel
seguir
to
avanzando
the
en esta
island
investigación
to
tan
continue
importante
with our
sobre la vida de
important
Fabricio
investigation
Ojeda
about
con la
Fabricio Ojeda's
Revolución
life
Cubana.
and its
Y
fight with the Cuban Revolution. And Fabricio also wrote another book about the Cuban Revolution. It was called Presencia Revolucionaria de Martí, the Revolutionary Presence of Martí. I will quote a part of this book that is important for all of us Latin Americans, stating, in Cuba, Martin triumphed, so Bolívar will triumph in Venezuela. So Fabricio was a prophet. As we see Commander Chavez as someone who was the one after Simon Bolívar, then the same thing was done by Fabricio, because he did not speak about the future. He saw this happening for his moment, for his time. He saw this, he understood that Bolívar was going to be triumphant in the 60s in Venezuela. I need to clarify, Walter. Fabricio was a deep revolutionary. He was a patriot. He was an anti-imperialist and a Bolivarian. There are a lot of thoughts about his Bolivarian thought, about his thought against the empire, about his thought for the nation. These were some of the words that he used. That's why the movement organized for Pérez Jiménez was called Patriotic Board, Junta Patriótica, and this word that Commander Chavez reminded us in his last message that he sent us on December 8, 2012, when he sang that song about Bravos de Apure, about our beloved nation, and we understood the relevance of the nation for us. He transformed the anthem into the second anthem for us. And like in Cuba, Bolívar triumphed, Bolívar will triumph in Venezuela, and San Martín, Venezuela, and O'Higgins in Chile, and Artigas in Uruguay, and Morelos in Mexico. For the Latin American Revolution, nothing can stop it. And we firmly believe, Walter, that this should be the case. A visionary, of course. These are people who are ahead of their time, like Bolívar, like Zamora, like Fabricio, like Chavez. They're ahead of their time. And they're characters that are guides for the progress of the revolution. So that's why what we've done as family members of Fabricio, sons, daughters, grandchildren, of starting researching all the history of Fabricio Ojeda. And let me remind you, Walter, and your audience, that Fabricio Ojeda's history, as many people in this term of the 60s and the 70s, was completely set invisible by the members of the Punto Fijo Pact, as well as taking over the media, who were trying to wipe out this history in order to avoid a reference for the future of all these characters. That's why our work is to gather the historical memoirs of all this period after Marco Pérez Jiménez with the Punto Fijo Pact, which was signed by the three big political parties, Acción Democrática, COPEI, and Unión Republicana Democrática, taking away the Communist Party that was the avant-garde party for overthrowing Marcos Pérez Jiménez, but that, of course, the line of Rómulo Betancourt, especially, who was under the wing of Rockefeller, who gave him his direction of excluding the Communist Party within the governance of Venezuela. This was specifically what happened, and they did so not only as part of the Punto Fijo Pact, but also when Rómulo Betancourt won the elections and became president. He spoke about different characters, different political parties. Let's not forget the Chancellor of Dignity of the URD party. And they were wiped out, the Communist Party, at that moment.
Fabricio retoma
So
justamente
Fabricio
estas alianzas, ¿no?
took
Después,
back these
Acción
alliances.
Democrática se divide en
Acción
lo que fue el
Democrática then
movimiento
was
Izquierda
divided
Revolucionario
into
y
the
empieza a
Izquierda Revolucionaria
gestarse lo que
movement
fue
and
la
started
lucha
creating
armada en
the
Venezuela.
armed fight of
Fabricio
Venezuela.
renuncia a su
Fabricio
curul en el
resigned to his
Congreso
position in the
luego de toda
Congress
esta experiencia
after all his
con la
experience
Revolución Cubana
with the Cuban
y
Revolution.
eso fue un gran ejemplo,
And
¿no?
it
Un
was a
gran
great
empuje, ¿no? Que
example
Fabricio Ojeda haya
to
renunciado
see
al
Fabricio
Congreso
Ojeda
Nacional y se haya ido
resigning
con rango
from
de
the
comandante
Congress and
a,
living with the rank
a
of
la
commander
lucha guerrillera.
and start with
Y
fighting
además,
the guerrilla.
ahí en ese momento lo
But
captura,
also he was then
lo
captured.
llevan a un juicio
He was
sumarial
taken
donde hay
to
120
a summary
guerrilleros,
trial,
le dan 18 años de
120
cárcel, y luego lo
guerrillas.
trasladan a la cárcel de
He was
Trujillo y ahí
taken
se
to
escapa y empieza a
Trujillo's
reorganizar
jail. He
todo
escaped.
lo que fue la lucha armada
He's
de
in
nuevo,
jail
¿no?
and he started
Y
with the
entonces
fight.
empieza un proceso
So he started with a
de
process
reorganización, de
of
crisis
reorganizing
dentro de la lucha,
within
dentro de la lucha
the
revolucionaria, porque
revolutionary
hay
fight,
que
because
decir, y esto empata
we
con lo
must
que
say
estábamos
this, and this
comentando
is
de
of
lo que
course
fue
matching what we said
Playa
before
Girón,
about Playa
luego
Girón,
lo que fue la crisis de los
and then the
misiles, Walter, en
crisis,
el
the
año
missile
60.
crisis in
Inolvidable para
1960,
cualquiera que
unforgettable
tuviera
for
uso de
everyone
razón.
who
Nunca estuvimos
thought
tan
back then
cerca.
we were
Así
never
es,
so
de
close.
una crisis nuclear,
A
¿no?
nuclear
Y
crisis.
eso tuvo un papel
And
importantísimo,
this
Walter,
had a
dentro
very
de lo que fue
important
la vida de
role
Fabricio
as
Ojeda,
part of the
porque
life of Fabricio
hubo
Ojeda,
un pacto dentro de lo
because
que
there
fue
was a pact
John Kennedy y Nikita
with
Khrushchev,
John
¿no?
Kennedy and Nikita Khrushchev
Uno dentro de esa crisis de los misiles y lo
as
que
part
le
of the missile
pidió,
crisis.
Estados Unidos a
And
la
the
Unión
United States
Soviética
requested the
fue
Soviet
que
Union
retirara los misiles que
to
habían en Cuba,
withdraw missiles
¿verdad?
in Cuba.
Pero Estados Unidos
But the United
además le
States
pide a la
also
Unión
requested the
Soviética que
Soviet
deje de
Union
apoyar a los
to
movimientos
stop
de lucha de liberación
supporting
nacional en el mundo.
the movements
Y eso
of
fue una
national
línea
liberation
que se
throughout the
gestó,
world. And this was
por
a line
supuesto, a
of
nivel
thought
clandestino, no
that
se
took
sabía,
place.
pero que fue una línea que llegó a muchos
Of course, it
partidos
wasn't well known,
comunistas,
but it reached
especialmente acá en Venezuela. Y el Partido Comunista de Venezuela
reached
dejó de
the
apoyar
different
la
parties,
lucha
and
armada.
the
Eso
Communist
fue una
Party
crisis
stopped
ideológica,
supporting the armed fight. And
de
this is a
mucho
crisis of
debate,
ideology, of a
donde
lot of
luego
thought.
posteriormente viene una división del Partido Comunista.
And this
Fabricio
was
no
the division
tenía
of the Communist
partido
Party.
político porque cuando renunció al Congreso había renunciado a su partido, que
Fabricio
era
did not
URD,
have a party because
pero
when he
él se
resigned from the
encontraba sin
Congress, he
partido.
said
Y
no to
luego
his party, so
fundan
he was
un
partyless.
propio
And then they founded their
partido
own
que fue una
party.
idea de Fabricio Ojeda, que fue el Partido de la Revolución Venezolana.
And then they founded the party
Para
at
ese
the
momento
Venezuelan Revolution.
empieza además a reorganizarse lo que es la lucha guerrillera,
And they
y él le
reorganized
dan el
the
rango
guerrilla
de
fight, and he
presidente
was
del Frente
given
de
the rank
Liberación
of
Nacional, que
president of
para
the
ese
Front of
momento
National
era como el
Liberation, that at
máximo
this
rango
point
que podía
was
existir
the highest
en
rank
cualquier parte del
in
mundo,
any part of the
porque
world,
se estaban gestando lo que fue la llamada
because they
tricontinental,
created the
que eran las
so-called
luchas de liberación
tricontinental,
nacional
which has
en
the fight
África, en
for
Asia
national
y en
liberation in
América
Africa,
Latina.
Asia, and Latin
Entonces,
America.
muy importante, y la conexión entre Fabricio y
And the
Fidel
connection
no dejó de
between
fluir,
Fabricio
porque
and Fidel
existieron
continued
cartas que Fabricio le
because there were
escribía,
letters
Fidel le escribía
written
a Fabricio, y
by
así
Fabricio and by
sucesivamente.
Fidel, and
Entonces,
so
bueno,
on and so
luego
forth.
Fabricio
And then
cae
Fabricio
detenido el 17 de junio de
was
1966
apprehended in
y 4 días
1966,
después
and
es
4 days after,
vilmente asesinado
he
en los calabozos
was
del servicio de
killed
información de las Fuerzas
in
Armadas,
the
lo que
jail
fue
of the
el
armed
CIFA.
forces, the so-called
Pero fíjate
CIFA.
la amistad de Fidel Castro
But
con
it's important for you to
Fabricio Ojeda,
understand
que
the
Fidel
friendship
Castro
between Fidel Castro and Ojeda.
decreta
Fidel
día
Castro
de duelo nacional por la muerte
decided it was the day
de
of
Fabricio
national
Ojeda.
grieving due to the death
Entonces,
of Fabricio
eso
Ojeda.
de verdad que es un gran honor
So this is
que
a
se
great
le otorgue
honor
la Revolución Cubana
given by the Cuban
a
Revolution to
en su
Fabricio
momento de su partida, de su asesinato.
when he was
Y
killed,
para
when he was
nosotros, por
murdered.
supuesto, reivindicamos
And
ese
for us,
gesto
we're able
del
to vindicate the
comandante,
gesture
Fidel
of
Castro.
Commander Fidel Castro
Absolutamente muy
Ruz.
poco frecuente.
It's not a frequent
es.
gesture, of course, and this shows the appreciation
Así es.
he had.
Entonces, bueno, Walter, también queríamos destacar acá
Walter, we also
lo que
wanted
fue la
to
amistad
highlight the
y la
friendship
relación que hubo
and the
con
relationship with
el comandante Ernesto Che Guevara.
Commander Ernesto Che Guevara.
Y
Esa es una etapa interesantísima.
Sí,
¿Qué nos
correcto.
aportas?
A very
sí,
interesting stage,
entonces, bueno,
of course.
justamente queríamos hacer una reflexión porque
I wanted to speak about this
queríamos dar justamente lo que fue esa
because
relación,
I
¿no?
wanted to speak about this
Hay un video
relationship.
que queríamos
There's a video
hacer mención. En
that
este
we
caso,
would like to
sería
share with
el
you.
video número
Video
3.
number 3.
El video número 3,
Video number
donde
3.
habla donde habla justamente Fidel Castro, ¿verdad? Sobre,
where Fidel Castro speaks
sobre lo que fue Fabricio Ojeda
about Fabricio Ojeda, about what he was, and about the relationship
con Ernesto Che Guevara,
with
¿no?
Ernesto Che Guevara.
Tenía la
Ernesto
intención,
Che Guevara had the
Walter,
intention,
de irse
Walter,
a la lucha armada, no
of
en
starring
Bolivia,
on our fight, not
sino
in Bolivia,
nada más y nada menos que en Venezuela.
but in
Esa
Venezuela.
era la
Es
intención.
un aspecto muy poco difundido.
This is
Sí,
not well
correcto.
known,
Aclarar eso,
and it's great to clarify this concept for
Realmente-
all the people,
que todos los teatros de operaciones
because
era uno de los más apetecidos y
all
complicados.
stages of operation is one of the
Sí.
most complicated
Yo seguí
one.
los pasos del Che
I
en
followed
Bolivia,
the
paso
steps
por
of
paso,
Che in
etapa
Bolivia,
por
step by
etapa,
step,
pero
stage by
de
stage.
Venezuela siempre pareció que iba o no iba, y todo
But
está
the thing
confirmado.
about Venezuela was never quite clear, and you're now confirming this fact. Please, director,
Tenemos aquí,
what do we have with us here?
Sí.
tenemos el video listo.
We have the video ready, so let's take a look at it.
Adelante, señor.
Ahora, el Che Guevara,
Now,
Ernesto Guevara,
Che Guevara, Ernesto Guevara. Fidel told me yesterday, providing some details. He was seriously thinking,
y lo conversó con Fidel,
and he spoke this
inicialmente no era Bolivia,
to Fidel about going not to Bolivia initially, but to Venezuela. Because in Venezuela there were better conditions, there were different guerrilla fronts in Venezuela.
incluso revisamos algunos
We were
detalles.
reviewing some details about this. Che Guevara spoke with different Venezuelans, amongst them Pedro Duno, may he rest in peace, an important member of the revolution until the end of his days.
Lo conocí en prisión, él fue
I met him in
visitarnos
prison.
a la cárcel
He
de
visited
Yara.
us in Yare jail.
El otro venezolano con el que el Che habló, según
The other
los escritos
Venezuelan
que hemos obtenido por
with
ahí,
whom
la
Chele
conferencia,
wrote, according to the information we have, is Armando Córdoba,
economista,
economist,
izquierda, por supuesto.
left-wing economist, of course.
Luego,
Then,
según esta referencia,
according
está
to
en
this
estos datos,
information and this data that we
Comité
have,
Central
the Central
del Partido
Committee
Comunista de
of the
Venezuela
Communist Party of Venezuela
decidió
decided
que la presencia del Che
that the
allá
presence of
no
Che
era
there
conveniente.
was not convenient,
Y por tanto, ante la falta
and
de
thus,
apoyo
due
en
to the lack
Venezuela,
of
en los
support in
movimientos
Venezuela
que han podido
from the
apoyarlo,
different movements that could have supported
ahí
him,
está el viejo guerrillero, más guerrillero que
there we
viejo,
have the
Ali
most
Rodríguez
important
que ya
member of the
estaba en la
guerrilla,
montaña.
Ali
Esos
Rodriguez
años,
Araque, was already in the
ahí está Ali
mountains.
Rodríguez.
There he is, Ali Rodriguez.
Ali Rodríguez Araque.
Ali Rodriguez Araque.
Ali, danos alguna
Ali,
referencia de esto.
could you tell us some
Más
information
sabe
about
diablo
this?
por viejo que por diablo.
You have a lot of great
El
information
guerrillero
about this.
embajador Ali Rodríguez Araque.
Guerrilla Ambassador Rodriguez Araque, do you have any information? That time we were told, indeed, and Pedro referred this to me, the possibility of Che going to Venezuela.
Te lo refirió, perdóname, a posteriori.
But this happened after, right? Yes, a posteriori, years after. Yes, we were very good friends. But I did not have this information. It was the decision of the Communist Party. It's understandable, because the discussion had started about the democratic peace that led the Communist Party to stop the armed fight that led to the division of the Communist Party and the look for all other forces that were part of the fight.
Bueno, y aquí tenemos
Well, and
un
here
ejemplo de los documentos
we
de
have
la
an example of the files of that time,
revisado de la República de Venezuela,
revised hologram,
la Defensa, Estado Mayor Conjunto,
the Republic of Venezuela,
de
state
San Cristóbal a Caracas,
from San
ordinario,
Cristobal
7 de
to
junio de
Caracas, ordinary July 7, 1965,
Teniente coronel, jefe de
Lieutenant
Departamento de Información, CIFA Miraflores,
of CIFA Miraflores,
L1007 informa.
L
Sitio
1700
denominado
reports, San Albertico site jurisdiction of Bucaracicao, limit of Magdalena, and the north of Santander, Colombia, with the Venezuelan bandolero Fabricio Ojeda, underlined. Ojeda is waiting for Commander Che Guevara, who is about to arrive, to take him to Venezuelan territory. This is an official copy of the document, and intelligence is now confirming what you just mentioned.
Sí,
Of course,
justamente Fabricio, y en el video,
Fabricio,
ese video que
the
observamos
video that we just
fue
saw
en un aló presidente para conmemorar
took
los
place in Allo
40
Presidente
años
to
del
commemorate the
asesinato
40
del
years
comandante Ernesto Che Guevara, y
of
fue
the
un
murder
aló
of Ernesto
presidente
Che
en
Guevara,
Santa
and it
Clara,
was
donde
in
está el
Santa
memorial
Clara,
del Che
Allo
Guevara,
Presidente with the memorial of Che
Eso
Guevara.
fue en el
This took
2007.
place in 2007.
El comandante Fidel Castro
And Commander
ya
Fidel
estaba
Castro
un poco quebrantado de salud, pero él hace
was
una
already
llamada
ill,
telefónica
so he called
a Chávez para ese
Chavez at
momento,
this
y
moment,
en ese momento Fidel le pregunta
and Fidel
sobre Fabricio Ojeda,
asked him
¿no?
about
Y
Fabricio Ojeda
ellos habían tenido una conversación
because they
previa,
had previously
el día anterior,
spoken the day before,
donde Fidel
and Fidel
justamente le hace esa confesión, ¿no? Porque
made this confession
ves, Walter, esto
because
es
you can
algo
see,
que es muy
Walter,
poco conocido, ¿no?
this
La
is not very
intención
well known.
de que el Che
The first
Guevara
intention
quería
of
era
Che Guevara
venirse para
of coming
Venezuela.
to Venezuela,
Y el contacto directo,
and
¿verdad?
the first
que
contact
tenía el Che,
that Che
¿verdad?
had
A través de Fidel, por
through
supuesto,
Fidel, of course,
era nada más y nada menos
was
que el comandante Roberto Pérez,
Commander
es decir,
Roberto
Fabricio Ojeda.
Pérez, so Fabricio Ojeda.
Entonces, Fabricio y el Che Guevara
And
también tuvieron
Fabricio
una amistad
and el Che
muy importante,
also
y
had a very
Fabricio
deep
era
friendship, and
la
Fabricio
persona contacto
was the
para
contact
introducir
person
al comandante
to
Ernesto Che
introduce
Guevara
Commander
a
Ernesto Che
Venezuela.
Guevara to
El
Venezuela.
Che se entrevistó justamente con
Che
algunos
had
sectores
an
del
interview
Partido
with some
Comunista en
sectors of the
Europa,
Communist Party in
luego de
Europe
su viaje de lucha en el Congo,
after
en África,
his
se reunió
fight
con
in
Pedro
Congo.
Duno,
He met with Pedro
en
Duno
Europa,
in Europe,
y el Che Guevara le hace
and
justamente,
Che Guevara
les da esa intención, les dice esa
showed
intención
his
de venirse
intention
para
of
Venezuela
coming
para,
to Venezuela
ingresar como comandante guerrillero
to be a member
en
of the
Venezuela,
guerrilla
pero
in
justamente
Venezuela.
el Partido Comunista de aquel momento,
But right
¿verdad?
at this moment, the
que ya
Communist
venía
Party
pacificándose,
that was
que
becoming
luego,
peaceful at
de
this
alguna
moment,
manera traicionan lo
and
que
that
fue la
somehow
lucha armada en
betrayed the
Venezuela,
armed
porque
fight of
habían-
Venezuela,
en un inicio habían
because at
comenzado
the beginning they had started
gestar, ellos fueron uno de los
to
gestores
create,
de la
they
lucha
were one
armada, pero
of
después hubo una
the
división
managers of the
que
armed fight,
dio
but then there was a
justamente con este
division
partido que funda Fabricio Ojeda y
that
otros
led to the
compañeros,
party
que era el
founded by
Partido de la
Fabricio Ojeda,
Revolución
which was the
Venezolana.
party of the Venezuelan Revolution.
Con este pacto que había
And with
habido
this
entre
pact
Kennedy
between
y Khrushchev,
Kennedy and Khrushchev,
donde justamente le habían pedido a la Unión Soviética que
where
dejara de
they
apoyar a la
requested
lucha
Soviet
de
Union
liberación
to stop
nacional en el
fighting
mundo,
lucha
pues,
de liberación
un poco
nacional around the
una
world.
consecuencia de aquella
This was the
crisis de
consequence of the
correcto,
missile
a través
crisis.
de la
Yes, of
crisis de
course,
los misiles,
to
pues
the missile
entonces
crisis.
esa línea había llegado
So
a
this
Venezuela.
line started
Y
arriving at
el
Venezuela,
Partido Comunista
and the Communist
le
Party
dice al Che Guevara que
told
su
Che
presencia en Venezuela
that his presence
no
in
era
Venezuela
conveniente,
was not
pero
convenient at
además
the
le
time,
dice
but they also
que
told
si
him
él entraba a Venezuela,
that if he was going
iba a
to
estar
go to Venezuela,
subordinado
he
al
was
Partido
going to be
Comunista,
under
algo
the
que, por
Communist
supuesto,
Party,
el comandante
something that,
Ernesto
of
Che Guevara
course,
no aceptó.
something that was not going to be
comprender.
accepted by Che Guevara,
Porque el Che Guevara ya
because
tenía
Che
un rango
already
a nivel
had
latinoamericano
a
de
rank
guerrillero heroico,
as a
y no
heroic
iba a permitir
guerrilla,
estar
and he was
subordinado
not
a
going
nadie, pues.
to
Entonces,
allow to
él
be
venía
under
era a
anyone,
aportar,
so he
como
was going
aportó
to
en la lucha
provide
guerrillera en Cuba.
his
Entonces,
support
bueno, ahí
as he
fue
did in
cuando
Cuba.
el Che Guevara decide
So this
irse
was
a
when
Bolivia
Che decided to go
a
to
gestar esa lucha
Bolivia
guerrillera allá, que era
to start
con
the
la
guerrilla
intención de
fight in
hacer un movimiento
Bolivia to create a
revolucionario
revolutionary
nivel
party
continental, porque
at a
como tú muy
continental
bien sabes,
level.
Walter,
You are
Bolivia
clearly aware
queda
of
en el
this
epicentro
because
de
Bolivia is in the
Sudamérica,
core of
y
South
además
America,
está con la frontera
and
con
it's of
Argentina,
course
con Chile,
bordering
con Paraguay,
Argentina,
y
Chile,
bueno, por
Paraguay,
supuesto, era un sitio estratégico,
and it was
¿no?
a
Pero la
strategic
intención
place.
del Che,
But the
porque debo
intention of
también
Che,
comentar
because I also need to say,
que Che estaba enamorado de
Che was
Venezuela.
in love with
Él
Venezuela.
vino en su primer viaje en motocicleta a
He
Venezuela.
came
Luego
to
se
Venezuela
tuvo
on
que ir a
his motorcycle
terminarse de
trip to
graduar de
Venezuela.
médico.
Then he
Luego quiso regresar
traveled
en
to
su segundo
graduate
viaje,
as
pero
a
no
doctor. Then he
pudo,
wanted to
y
come
tuvo
back,
que
but he was
desviarse
unable to
hacia
do so, and he had to go to
Guatemala. Y es cuando
Guatemala.
ve el derrocamiento de
And
Jacobo
he
Arbe,
saw
y luego
Jacobo
se va a
Arbe
México, y
overthrown,
es
and then
cuando
he went
conoce
to
a Fidel
Mexico
Castro.
and met Fidel.
Y entonces,
Absolutamente providencial. todo
sí,
esto.
Absolutely
señor, sí,
necessary
señor.
at that point,
Y
of
bueno,
course.
pero cuando Fidel
But
viene
when
el
Fidel
23 de enero
first
de
arrived
1959,
on
el Che quería
1959,
venir con
Che
él en
wanted
esa
to come
primera
with
visita
him
de
in
Fidel
this first
Castro.
visit.
Pero el Che Guevara
But Che
había caído enfermo de su
was
asma y no
sick
pudo venir a
because he
Venezuela.
was asthmatic,
Entonces,
as you
otra
know, and
vez
he was unable
Venezuela
to
se
come
le
to
negaba,
Venezuela.
se
So
le negaba.
once again,
Y
Venezuela was
ahora,
denied to him.
luego, para este año
And then,
65,
once again, for
Venezuela se le vuelve
1965,
a negar,
Venezuela was
justamente
again
porque
denied
se
to him
entrevista con estos
because
sectores del
he
Partido
had an
Comunista,
interview with different
y que,
members
bueno,
of the Communist Party.
lastimosamente,
And unfortunately,
el Che Guevara no pudo estar
Che
como
Guevara
comandante guerrillero
was not able to
acá
come
en
here
Venezuela.
as a
Pero
commander of the guerrilla guerrilla here in Venezuela.
Cuando la muerte de
But then,
Fabricio,
When Fabricio was killed, Che Guevara, before going to Bolivia, sent a message to the Tricontinental, and with this message, Che said, we need to create 1, 2, 3, or more Vietnams. That's our word. And he spoke about different guerrilla members. In the margin of this fight, the ones currently active are only episodes, but they have already shown the march that will be part of American history, given their blood in this necessary stage of fight for the full freedom of men, with the names of Commander Tucio Lima, Priest Camilo Torres, Commander Fabricio Ojeda, Commanders Lobatón and Luis de la Puente Uceda, important members of the revolutionary fight of Guatemala, Colombia, Venezuela, and Peru. So Commander Che Guevara was acknowledging all these commanders as the main figures in the movement of national liberation of Latin America. Then Ernesto Che Guevara was killed in combat in Bolivia, and the government of Venezuela sent this telegram that I would like for you to read again. It's a telegram that is not known, where they wanted to try to fake the suicide of Che Guevara. The same thing happened with Fabricio. They killed him, and then they told that he killed himself. And everyone in Venezuela knew that Fabricio Ojeda did not kill himself, but they wanted to do so with Commander Che Guevara. So please read this again. Here we have a telegram sent by the Ministry of Defense of Venezuela to the Pentagon. Due to the death of Ernesto Che Guevara, that was shown in Casa de las Américas magazine edition #1, saying, President Leone suggested the Bolivian government to widespread the news that Che Guevara had killed himself. After being captured alive, the Stop Venezuela government was willing to send a Digipol expert of the Service of Intelligence for the suicide. The same expert for the Fabricio Ojeda case. So they had experts about manufacturing suicide news, and they wanted to take this to the Guevara topic, the same what that your grandfather had to go through. And of course, this is how the right wing acts, Walter. They're cynical like this, Walter. And this is to show all the audience that's watching this prestigious program how fascism acts, because this is how we need to call them. They're fascists. We need to acknowledge that here in Venezuela, the president who killed Fabricio Ojeda, Raúl Leone, infamous Raúl Leone, started applying the policy of the missing. The policy started in Venezuela. And here in Venezuela, there are from 3,000 to 5,000 people gone missing that never returned. Their families are still looking to them. So this is what they do. And this was terrible at the moment. And it was taken to the policy of the Condor Plan, where in Argentina, Chile, Paraguay, and Brazil, there weren't only 5,000, but 10,000, 15,000, 20,000 people gone missing. And of course, this was not well known in Venezuela, but here there were a lot of people who were missing as well. And we need to clarify as well that the one who sent the order of killing Fabricio was coming from the Pentagon, even though it was received by Leone, but it came from the Pentagon, from the CIA, given by the ones that we presume are the ones getting the benefit of the murder of John Kennedy, who was the vice president, who was Lyndon Johnson, vice president of the United States,
profundiza
who
la
was the
guerra de
one
Vietnam,
that
porque de alguna
deepened
manera
the
Kennedy
Vietnam
quería
War,
bajar
because
un
Kennedy
poco
wanted
lo
to
que era la guerra, porque
lower
ya se
the
le
tone
estaba
of the war
levantando a los Estados
because
Unidos, había una
he
crítica muy
was
profunda
seeing the criticism of
justamente
the
en
state
Estados Unidos sobre lo que era la guerra de Vietnam,
about the
y él
Vietnam
quería
War,
un poco
and he
amaguar
wanted
eso.
to
Pero
soften
El
this.
aparato tecnológico militar
And
industrial estaba
the
haciendo miles de
military
millones.
industry was
Ese
making
Kennedy,
billions
que
with
era
this.
de alguna manera un héroe de guerra,
And
comandante
Kennedy,
de una lancha torpedera,
who was
con buena gestión, tenía la autoridad moral, además de ser
a war hero, had the authority of being commander-in-chief. Yes, and we have this impression that Lyndon Johnson was the one who ordered the assassination of Kennedy because he was the one who became the president, and he started working with these wars in Vietnam, Latin America, and Africa, and Asia.
Él es el asesino de Fabricio Ojeda
And
y es
he
el
is Fabricio
asesino del
Ojeda's
comandante
murderer.
Ernesto Che Guevara. Él es el
And the
asesino de
killer
esos dos
of Che
grandes
Guevara.
comandantes,
He
de
is the
Fabricio
killer of these two,
y de
Fabricio
Che.
and Che.
Entonces Lyndon Johnson es un
So Lyndon
personaje
Johnson
siniestro
is a
dentro de
sinister
lo que es
character
la presidencia de Estados Unidos.
in the presidency
Pero
of the United States.
no quería terminar el programa, Walter,
But
sin
before
hacer
in
un
the
poco
show,
la
Walter,
conexión entre
I would
lo
like
que
to make a
es la
connection
guerrilla de
between
aquel momento,
guerrilla back
¿verdad?
then,
Lo que fue el partido de la Revolución Venezolana,
the
que fue
party,
el partido que fundó
the
Fabricio
Venezuelan
Ojeda,
Revolution
con lo que
founded
fue
by
la
Fabricio
Revolución
Ojeda
Bolivariana.
with the Bolivarian
Acá tengo un
Revolution.
libro que se llama Guerrilla
This
y
book is
Revolución
called Guerrilla and
Bolivariana, y
Revolution.
justamente hace un poco lo que es
And it
la
basically
conexión
creates a connection
de Chávez con los antiguos guerrilleros.
of Chavez
Por
with
supuesto
the
que
former
Chávez ya
guerrilla.
había iniciado su
Chavez
carrera
had already
militar,
started his
Fabricio ya lo
military
habían
career.
asesinado en el
Fabricio
año
was already
66,
killed in
pero
1966.
Chávez
But
tenía la
Chavez
intención de,
had the
mientras que él estaba
intention,
luchando
while he was
contra los
fighting
guerrilleros,
against the
¿verdad?
guerrilla,
Porque formó parte de los,
because he was
de los
part
batallones de
of the
cazadores,
battalions
los
of
comandos
hunters
antiguerrilleros,
that were the commands
pero
against
como
the
él era
guerrilla. But
revolucionario,
as he
él
was a
estaba
revolutionary,
leyendo
he was
los
reading
libros del Che Guevara,
the books written by
llamados Guerra
Che,
de Guerrillas.
called The War of the
Su
Guerrillas.
hermano, Adán Chávez,
His brother,
formó
Adán
parte de lo que
Chávez,
fue el movimiento
was a
del
member
partido
of
que
the
fundó
movement of the
Fabricio
party
Ojeda,
founded
el
by
Partido
Fabricio
de la
Ojeda,
Revolución
the
Venezolana,
party
y un
of the
movimiento
Venezuelan
cultural llamado
Revolution,
Ruptura.
in
Entonces,
a
en este
movement
libro
called
dice,
Ruptura.
Hugo Chávez
So in
era
this
un
book,
joven teniente
it said
cuando su
Hugo
hermano
Chavez was
Adán
a young
Chávez le
lieutenant when his
informó
brother Adán
que
Chavez
sería
informed him that
contactado
he was
por el
going to be
Partido de la
contacted
Revolución
by the
Venezolana,
party
este partido
of
que
the
fundó
Venezuelan
Fabricio Ojeda
Revolution,
el 23 de
the
abril
party
de
founded by Fabricio Ojeda in
1966.
1966.
Y dice, como
And it
parte
says,
del plan de
as
esa
part of
organización
the plan of this
revolucionaria para
revolutionary
adelantar una
organization
insurrección
to
cívico-militar,
create
Hugo
a
Chávez aceptó.
civic military organization, Hugo Chavez
Chávez
accepted.
sostuvo con
Chavez
altibajos la relación con la causa
held
R,
relationships
pero
with the
desarrolló
Arcas,
su
but
verdadera militancia con el guerrillero
created
Partido de
his
la
own
Revolución
cause
Venezolana,
with
PRV,
the
que provenía de
PRV
una
party
división
that
del
came
Partido
from a
Comunista.
division of the Communist Party.
Adán Chávez le
Adán
proporcionó
Chávez
a su hermano la clave
gave
de
his brother
reconocimiento y así comenzó la conexión
recognition
formal
and
entre
started
Chávez
the
y el
connection
PRV, que 2 décadas más tarde
between Chávez
serán
and the PRV.
fundamentales
The
para
2
comprender
decades
el
after
cambio de
will be
rumbo
fundamental
de
to
la
understand
historia
the
de
change
Venezuela.
of the history of
Yo estaba
Venezuela.
comentando esto, Walter,
I was
en un
speaking
programa
about this,
Dando y Dando con la compañera
Walter,
Tania
in
Díaz.
Dando y Dando, a show
Y
with Tania
cuando yo
Díaz.
estoy diciendo
And when I was
esto,
saying
algo que, por
this,
supuesto, es
something that
prácticamente
is,
inédito,
of
era muy
course,
poco conocido,
was
era
new,
clandestino,
was not
que los
well known, it
militares
was
estaban en
clandestine,
contacto
that the
con los
members of the
guerrilleros,
military were
con
in
los
contact
partidos
with the
guerrilleros,
guerrilla,
¿verdad?
with the different parties of the
Nada más y
guerrilla.
nada menos para corroborar esto, llamó
And just to
el
show
mismísimo
this,
comandante Hugo Rafael Chávez Frías
Commander
para
Chavez
corroborar
called
esto que
to
yo
the
estaba
program
diciendo. Tania Díaz,
to say this.
lo primero que hizo fue
And
preguntarle
Tania
y
Diaz
corroborarle
first
esto.
asked
Mire,
him
comandante
about the
Chávez,
information. She
acá
said,
está hablando
Commander
de
Chavez,
Fabricio
listen,
Ojeda, está
here
hablando
we're
sobre su
listening to
conexión
Fabricio Ojeda's
con el
grandson
Partido de la
about his
Revolución
connection
Venezolana, un
with
partido que fundó
the
Fabricio Ojeda.
revolution
Eso es cierto, y
and
el
the party
comandante
founded
Chávez,
by
en
Fabricio
esta
Ojeda. And
llamada
Commander
telefónica,
Chavez, in this phone call,
lo aseveró y dijo, sí,
said that it was true. He said,
efectivamente, yo llegué a
indeed,
formar parte
I
de lo
was
que
a
fue
member
el directorio nacional
of
del
the
Partido
National
de la Revolución
Directorate of the
Venezolana,
Party
solo
of
que
the
para ese momento
Revolution
no
of
se podía saber
Venezuela.
que los
But at this point,
guerrilleros y los
it
militares
was not
estaban en
known that the
contacto para lo
guerrilla
que
and the
fue
military
la
were in
gesta del
contact
4
for
de
the
febrero
creation
de
of February 4th,
1992.
1992.
Bueno,
Walter.
José Luis Alcalá
Well,
Ojeda,
José Luis
nieto
Alcalá
del diputado
Ojeda,
guerrillero Fabricio
grandson
Ojeda,
of Fabricio
del que
Ojeda,
tanto se habla, y no siempre hay un
a very
testimonio
important
tan
character,
directo,
but we don't always have such an important statement.
motivante.
So encouraging from a genetic perspective. It's been a pleasure having you here. Unfortunately, we're out of time and we have to conclude the show. So you have 30 seconds to say something. Well, Walter, thank you so much for the invitation. I would love to come to this program again to speak deeper about the thought against the empire of Fabricio, because, as we said, Walter, Fabricio's thought is avant-garde, is for the future, and it's also for our present, to build the process of the Bolivarian Revolution, a process that we, of course, have supported. Ojeda's family has supported this process since the beginning. Since February 4, we've seen Commander Hugo Chavez. As the song Fabricio Ojeda, I would have given you a son, and the son would have been the people. And it would have been like you, a soldier. That people and this soldier is, of course, Hugo Chavez. We see him as the son of Fabricio. Fabricio's children see Hugo Chavez as their brother, because he is the one who has continued with this fight. Chavez was forming the idea of the Revolutionary Party founded by Fabricio Ojeda only 2 months before he was killed. And of course, for us, it's fundamental to deepen the knowledge about Fabricio Ojeda within the Bolivarian Revolution. We need to acknowledge, Walter, that just 1 year ago, Fabricio Ojeda was taken to the national graveyard with military honors. We'd like to thank Nicolás Maduro for this incredible gesture of taking Fabricio Ojeda, another commander, as Gabaldon, to the national cemetery. And for us, it's fundamental to continue deepening the thought of these people. And I would love to return to this program to go deeper about the thought against the empire, the patriotic thought, the Bolivarian thought, the revolutionary thought of Fabricio Ojeda. Thank you very much for this invitation. It's great for you to speak about Gabaldon. So everybody on that side of the screen, thank you for allowing us to be there with you. From Studio 3 of Venezuela Televisión, here I close Dossier, the doyen program in the Western Hemisphere of international satellite information. Let's hope the new generations have the opportunity of seeing a different reading of the recent history of our country. Director, the floor is all yours.